Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar today by the PRCA on how to measure GEO. We're just getting a few people joining, so please grab a coffee or a glass of water and we'll start in approximately 2 minutes. Thank you for your patience. Let's just wait for other people to join. Thank you very much. Just saying the same message again. Welcome to the How to Measure GEO webinar by the PRCA. We'll be starting this in approximately 1 minute. We're just allowing the few people with technical difficulties to enter the Zoom meeting. Thank you for your patience. Okay, I think we should start. Well, I'm very excited that you can all join today's webinar from the PRCA on how to measure GEO. Personally, I have never been in this industry in a more exciting time. And every time that people in PR say, I wish we had that important seat at the table, pay attention. This is our moment. The team who are supporting this effort are the world leaders in this space. And they're going to introduce themselves. But let me just tell you a bit about what this is going on. Our mission as part of the PRCA Innovation Working Group exists to future-proof the PR industry, equipping agencies of every size to lead the AI revolution through practical guidance, rigorous certification, and an uncompromising commitment to professional values. More specifically, you've got people who are purely dedicated to Gen AI. And this is part of a 90-day working group to measure and prove a new measurement standard for earned media in the AI ecosystem. Objective is to move beyond vanity metrics to impact-based KPIs that give the C-suite universal language for PR value. And that's a bit of a mouthful, but let's move on to the next slide as we talk a bit about what we intend to do today. So as we move forward, I just want to set a few ground rules. If you go on your screen, you'll see a little button that says more. If you press that more button, or sometimes some of you will just have a Q&A button, you can click the Q&A or the more button, whichever way works, and put a question in there. We will answer your questions, and we will talk on those at the end of the meeting. So as we continue, feel free to jump in, ask those questions as we go on, but my name is Johnny Bentwood. I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Golan Ketchum. My colleagues on the line are going to introduce themselves, but this is all about how we measure GEO. Now, moving on, one of the things you will see is that, next slide, please, Stuart, is that we're going to be thinking about what is the output of this. Now, for those of you thinking I've got to take copious notes, don't worry, click that QR code because we have a white paper that explains everything. Now, on that QR code, we have created between us a white paper that shows you all the practical steps that you need to do. There is so much theory about what we need to do and how it should work. We're trying to get past the theory and make this as practical and tangible as possible. What are the things we absolutely need to measure and how do we do this? The white paper explains it. Today's webinar will go into the detail and the practicalities of it. Moving on, please, Stuart. But as part of this, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. And the giant in this situation is AMEC, the Association for Measurements and Evaluation Communications. And they have actually created a set of GEO principles that we fundamentally want everyone to take and acknowledge. Click on this QR code over here, because this explains the basis and principles by how we need to work. What we've done here in this white paper is a complement to what AMEC have already done. It's meant to work alongside it and how this can all work. I encourage all of you to take a click of that QR code and go there yourselves. But it's all based upon the 3 triangulations of upstream reputation, search and content readiness, and downstream AI outputs. I'm going to move quickly along and just set some basis about why this is important. Moving on, please, Stuart. And part of this is an understanding of the narrative that you guys can do to your colleagues, to your clients about why we need to take part. And the first thing is people aren't using Google. They're saying 75% of Google search is zero click, which means they go nowhere. In fact, the CEO of Condé Nast, he's the guy who does Vogue, the biggest media company in the world. He said he expects this to be 100%. It means all those searches on Google don't go anywhere. What happens instead? Stuart, next slide, please. You see, what is happening instead is people are going to Gen AI. But that's a problem. Because historically, when you picked up your phone and did your search on Google, you would say, well, that's rubbish. They've obviously sponsored that. They've obviously gamed it with SEO. They've obviously bought the keywords. And we applied critical thinking, would scroll past it. Now, we've gone from critical thinking to anchor bias, where we see that first result that turns up in Gen AI and go, bloody hell, that's perfect. I'm just going to accept that. That is the world we live in. And because of that, because that first answer is so important, we have an opportunity to measure and impact this. Some stats to help you in your narrative. Moving on, please, Stuart. First of all, on the consumer side of things, you need to understand that people are going to Gen AI. The thing that really gets me, more than 3/4 of our target audience are going to Gen AI first, and people are trusting Gen AI answers more than they're trusting their friends. This is incredible. Now, some of you on the line here may be thinking, well, that's not relevant for me because I'm not in the consumer space. Well, next slide, please. Well, on what we're finding out, if you're in the B2B space, it's even worse. It's in the 90th percentile. People are trusting Gen AI and going there first. More than ever, we need to get people to pay attention to this. And I want you to use this first set of slides to help you understand your narrative that you can speak to your clients, speak to your colleagues about getting them to get on with this, because this is critical. Moving on, please, Stuart. So what all this means is that historically, and for the past 25 years, we have been using Google as our front door of the internet. Now people are going to Gen AI. They're not even going to branded websites. They're just taking that first answer that comes back, which means we've got a new approach. In addition to doing PR for humans, we need to continue to do marketing to humans. I'm not saying stop, but there's a new area that we need to do. We must now also market to machines. And to explain how we measure as the first step, it's not about evaluation, it's about informing what we should do as well. Let's move over to my colleague. Moving forward, please.
Thanks, Johnny. Hello, everybody. I'm Alison Spray. I'm the Chief Data and Intelligence Officer for EMEA at Burson. And now I'm going to take you through the shift into the practical. So how can we share some of the learnings? Most of us on this call have from a few decades of measurement in PR. So I think the first principle I'll say, and really a super critical one to remember in case you are taking those copious notes that Johnny mentioned, is that you need to set up GEO measurement before you need it. And what that means is having real clarity around the objectives, your baseline, and the prompts is coming before we start to talk about what tools you're going to use to do that. So if we click on, what I would say is, done well, measurement really does more than tell you whether you hit the target. Good measurement starts with a decision about what you're trying to learn. And of course, GEO programs don't exist in a vacuum. They are useful when they're planned into wider campaign or brand measurement rather than run as a standalone. So this is about understanding how measurement of GEO in concert with those other activities is going to show you how to steer, how you can understand which narratives, which markets, which prompts are working, and where you need to adjust along the way. So before you start, let's think about 2 ground rules to consider. So if we move on to the next slide. 2 ground rules to consider, really in GEO or frankly in otherwise. The first is measure against objectives, not activity. So you need to decide the question you're answering before you pick a metric. Are we recommended for this category? Is an interesting, more measurable objective. How visible are we? On its own is not. The second thing to keep in mind, as I said earlier, is that you need to set it up before you need it. There's no back search when we're looking at this. These answer engine tools aren't holding historical record just yet. So your baseline exists from the day monitoring starts, and trends are only going to be looked forwards. So you need to stand up your program before the campaign, before the crisis, before the issue, ideally not during it. And if we're getting really practical, then let's get specific to GEO and start with a brief. And again, I'm sticking in twos today. So two things to think about. This short brief really is going to sharpen any program before a single prompt is run and help support stakeholder management throughout. So the first thing you need to answer if we click is what. What does the work need to answer, and which narratives are in scope? If you can articulate that, you're going to have a much better start for how the rest of your measurement pulls through. Second thing you need to think about is which. So if we click, we'll see that. Which brands, products, audiences, and markets, as well as languages, are being measured? What competitors do you want to look at from across the competitive set? How can you create that comparison? And that might be category or it might be informational. Because again, exactly as Johnny was saying, how people use answer engines is slightly different to how we might have thought about competitive sets in the past. We need to think about which of the answer engines matter for the audiences that you're looking at. And of course, which prompts, branded and unbranded, actually reflect what people are going to ask. And really, I would encourage you to pay particular attention to that last point. A read that's built only on branded prompts will be very flattering to the brand that you're looking for. But it is those unbranded category level prompts, the one people use before they know your brand, that are going to help give you that context to where you really stand. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to talk a little bit more about what you should track first. Over to you, Sanjeev.
Thanks, Alison. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanjeev Vinayak. I'm Head of Innovation and Emerging Tech at Milk and Honey. And here I'm going to talk about what geometrics should you track first. So if we go on to the next slide, what do we need to measure if we're just getting started? Importantly, you don't need the full complexity here. In the white paper, we outline several metrics and break down the different metrics that you need to track at this first stage. What we've done for the purpose of this webinar is to break this down into something actionable. So we've bucketed these into three main categories, purely to make the mechanics of tracking a bit easier. First, we look at what people see. These are the actual prompts. So this is downstream from what Johnny was speaking about earlier, AI output tracking. Then we look at, can it be found? This is across your own channels on your website. Is your content being read? This is the content search readiness. And then finally, we look at what has happened as a result. These are the outcomes. So these are how people are reacting. Are people acting differently? If we first take a look at downstream, Stuart, we go on to the next slide. We can see that all of these, if we're looking at what people can see, all of these metrics can be analyzed from one base set of prompts. So all of the metrics can be built from the same analysis. First, we look at Gen AI visibility by topic. These are you present in AI answers at all? These are fundamental. So when people are talking about your brand or your topic, are you showing up? Ultimately, as Alison was talking about, you define the topics that match your positions. You then build your prompts. You run these against your answer engines, and you look at the responses and track these over time. The next, we look at Gen AI share of voice versus competitors. Here we look at the same prompts and we see how your competitors are showing up in those responses. You can track prominence. You can see where you sit comparatively to these competitors. And then when we're looking at branded and unbranded, you can look at head-to-head prompts and responses to kind of get a gauge of where you sit within that. Gen AI net sentiment, again, this is just to flag reputational risks early. It's not a headline metric, but ultimately you're just looking at the difference between if you look at all of those responses and then you categorize them by their sentiment, find out what the resultant is, you can track where reputational risks stand earlier. And then ultimately the accuracy of answers. So again, within this initial prompt set, from these responses, you can categorize them in terms of outdated information, misleading information, maybe even incoherent information, and make sure you're tracking these over time. The next we look at is, can it be found? This is where you look at cited URL count. So when we're looking at can it be found and cited URL count, we're looking at how many of your own pages are being pulled through by user agents. This is not from your original data set, your prompt set from what people see. This, you need to look at server logs. Anyone who manages your website hosting can share this with you, but ultimately you're looking at whether these AI crawlers are indexing and reading the information on your own channels. Track these over a set period, look at the visitor data, see who's clicked into your website or these particular pages through an AI chatbot, and then log it. Did AI read the content? Did a real person turn up as a result? Finally, we can look at what happened as a result. If we go on to the next slide, the two main metrics that we're tracking here over a longer period of time are branded search volume trend and key event completions. Branded search volume trend is something where we're not looking at how your brand or topic is showing up in AI answers. We're looking at how people are reacting as a result of this. So has AI visibility converted into active user search? Choose which search terms that are relevant to your brand or topic. Use Google Trends. You can use RFs or any other kind of tools that you have to pull up the trends or the data from these search terms. Line up any spikes with activity, and of course, cross-reference these spikes with other metrics before crediting it all to AI. Again, keep a log and look across kind of 6 to 12 months. The next and the final one is key event completions. It's really delving into kind of what people are doing as a result of kind of these AI responses. So are they going to your website? Are they downloading? Are they signing up? Are they inquiring? Define what you need to track here and track it. Filter the sessions via AI referral. You can do this on GA4. Track which of those tasks are completed, which of those users have completed those actions, and then compare against other traffic sources. Again, track this over a longer period of time. You're looking at kind of 6 to 12 months here. Ultimately, none of these metrics in isolation can give you the full picture. They need to work together and they can create that kind of completed picture of what you're measuring. I'll now pass on to Stuart to talk about the slightly more robust approach to this.
Thank you for that. So, yeah, I think one of the challenges we have here is that GEO is still a very new discipline, but the key thing is that it builds on the expertise and the experience that public relations and communications people already have. And if we start to look at what this kind of robust approach to GEO measurement looks like, the first thing that we need to think about is the need to triangulate. So unlike if we're doing media monitoring or social listening, or search, one of the things that you can't do with GEO is get access to absolutely robust data. We've already heard Alison explain that there's no kind of historic data to look at. Your benchmark is from when you start to do it. So what you need to be able to do is you actually need to be able to come back, is to look at not just a single tool or platform and take that as the single source of truth. You actually have to look at the methodology that you're using and actually work out what data is going to be useful for you to give you that kind of correct understanding of where you are. And the other thing that's really important is that we've got to separate the output from the impact. So visibility is only part of what we're interested in. By far and away, the most important part of what we're interested in is, does it do something? It's no good just showing up in AI answers, but what does it actually mean? How accurate is it? And then the final part of this is looking at showing your workings. So those of you that are familiar with kind of the Barcelona principles from AMEC that came before the GEO principles. They were published in kind of 2010 and under their fourth iteration. The seventh Barcelona principles is all about transparency and showing how the sausage machine works. And that's a kind of key part of how we should be approaching GEO. We've got to be careful of not overclaiming the results that we're finding or what we can do in terms of acting on that, the insight that we get from those results. So the 5 questions that we need to be starting with for our robust approach to doing GEO is, first of all, it's did we appear? Secondly, were we prominent? Third, was the answer right? And all of these things are what people take from an AI answer. But the most important part is actually the result. So did it point to a credible proof? Did it change behavior or outcomes? And going on to look at kind of each of those things in a little bit more detail, that did we appear is about, it's not just about tracking whether the brand, product or expert or narrative appears in the prompts. You know, when we talk about the narrative appearing, sometimes it's getting our version of the truth. It's about getting our stories, our issues surfacing in AI answers. It's not just about getting that brand mention or that product mention. If somebody's searching for something, what's a sustainable power source for a factory, or what are the key features you should be looking for in a new pair of trainers or running shoes, you want the reasons that you would be promoting to be appearing, not necessarily just just the brand or the product name. And secondly, were we prominent? So whereabouts actually appearing in those AI answers? Is it leading with your brand? Is it leading with your product or your opinion or your point of view? Is it comparing you favorably with competitors and peers? Or are you only kind of getting a mention in passing? It's kind of, oh, you can also consider these. The third one we want to look at is, was the answer right? How accurate is it? What about the sentiment? Is there some missing context? What citations are supporting that? And this one's particularly important because if you are getting a citation as one of the sources for the answer, but the answer's inaccurate, that's going to have a negative impact on your reputation and your brand, because people will associate you with that inaccurate answer, even if your specific citation is one of the correct ones. And one of the challenges that we have is, when you actually look at the tools on the market, that's not one of the things that they focus on. A lot of the tools do focus on kind of visibility and citations rather than accuracy. And the fourth, moving on to the things, does it matter? Has it actually achieved something? Is the fourth question is, did it point to some credible proof? So what sources, what third-party signals are cited or implied? And are they helping people to actually verify that answer? So how can people justify what that AI answer is saying? And the most important one is number 5. Did it change behavior or outcomes? So whatever it is we were trying to achieve, whether it was about increasing sales, whether it was recruitment, whether it was about reducing churn from customers, whether it was about a legislative change, or a change in people's understanding of a topic or issue that's really important to the client. All of these things are legitimate organizational objectives that we can be looking at. And what we need to be able to understand is how are those AI answers playing into that and becoming part of it. So next, I want to hand you on to Anna, who's going to talk about how we can report.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna, and I have an interesting job, and that's why I wanted to talk about this bit. The reason I've got an interesting job is I spend half my week in an agency at Tangerine, heading up digital strategy and innovation, and the other half of my week I spend in-house marketing planning at Specsavers. So this is a problem that I face daily and work with the team daily on, is how do we tell the story within a business to the different layers, to the different spokespeople, with the consideration of their lives and their worlds and the different things that they have going on. So, Stuart, if you could help me drive, next slide. I thought this was a great example. Moneyball, I'm sure everyone's seen it, but I love this example. Not everyone loves data as much as Billy Bean does, okay? And it's great. I love the data. I would sit all day and bathe in spreadsheets, but not all of us would. And the problem here is the data is so important. How do we connect it to a story and to a concept that actually is really important to people? And if you move on, Stuart, one thing that I know we will all find is that no one loves the data until they understand what it means. They understand the journey it takes them on, the problem it solves, and the value it has. And one of the things that we know is actually the right level of data for the right area of the business is absolutely crucial, but how you contextualize that is really crucially important. So if you move on. One of the things we really talked about as this group and really wanted to share on this call is the levels of data, boardroom data. I always think boards are a bit like tigers, you know, they look a bit scary, but if you feed them the right level of meat, they're actually they're pussycats, right? So how do we produce a simple read, a clear objective? What is it doing for the business? What's it doing for the brand? How is it setting us apart in the industry? And clearly articulating, did it drive value and action? Now, a really interesting take here is that the category competitors aren't always your generative competitors. Sometimes an informational competitor will come in and it will change the lens on which you look at this. So it's a really little interesting take out there, a little tip for you. Second point, the project teams, the project team, the Billy Beans of this world, you know, who are the people that are going to be implementing this and how can we empower and enable them to do that? How can we interpret that data? How can we give them enough to steer a campaign, enough to feel empowered, and most importantly, enough clear sound bites that they can take that and represent it within the business? And then finally, not every business has this. Oh, Stuart, we're so in sync. There we go. The final layer is that analyst view. Not every business has this, not every business needs this, not every business wants this, but those that do, it's very, very useful to be in sync. The full data dump, that detail, the full prompt and platform testing, what it means, and really being in lockstep about how this aligns with other tests and other priorities within the business. And then if you just move forward, what should always be consistent across all of this is the key takeouts and the implications. Now, a quick watch out here. We've all heard about zero click. I'm not going to go in hard on it. We've already talked about it. But a really great story that brings this to life. I was reading a case study today from a furniture retailer in the States, and they were losing their head because of zero click. Their traffic dropped around 30% over the space of about 3 months. And they were losing their head, they were panicking, etc. Now, what's really interesting is, as it says here and as the paper says, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Why is it not a bad thing? Because if people are getting the information they need in generative search, if you are optimized, if you are visible, if you are findable, and you're getting the correct information, then the right quality of traffic will come through to your site. So when they looked at their conversion rate actually went up, but from less traffic. The dwell time was up, their conversion rate was better. So zero click is a worry, yes, but it is a worry in context, and we should be looking at the whole rather than the sum of its parts. Okay, I'm going to go through this quite quickly now. So some limits, and we must have integrity in measurement. We must do that, and it's something that we all felt very passionately about as part of this project. So a couple of things to think about. One, there is no silver bullet, right? We should be looking at the whole rather than one specific metric, okay? And what we need to be doing is showing progress over time for these boards. Like we said, like Alison said earlier, start with your baseline. Make sure that we are showing progress over time. The second thing is, do not score yourself, because this is such a dynamic environment and there are so many different moving parts. Look at each output as a snapshot and accept that this is a very movable beast. We should be taking snapshots over time, reading this, understanding the context, and allowing it to connect to our business goals and the market. The last 2 points are quite interesting in the sense that this should be directional. Okay, this is really, like we said, it's a dynamic environment. And if we just connect that to the next point, what we know is that what we're getting when we look at these tools is how the AI is interpreting the information that we're feeding into there. And that should not be interpreted as how you can feed the information into it. There's a difference. How the AI is interpreting the information that's already there and what you can do to feed it are separate, and they should be treated separately. You move on. Just 2 quick points to sort of close this section out on, and it's just to really highlight this. Citation volume is a vanity metric. It's a bit like, if we were looked at the old media metrics of impressions, if we were looking at the AVE, it is highly vanity metric. And what we don't want to do is sit here and count the number of links. 100,000 links may mean, yeah, that's a high volume, but 100 of the right links will move the dial much further. Where are you showing up in the right context, in the right places, and how are you showing up in the right context and the right intent queries so that you can actually add value to businesses? It's really important to draw that distinction and not be taken down the garden path. And the last point is, and I see a lot of this in my dual role, is that there's a lot of talk in the market about how we can quickly shift the dial and how we can flood the web with information and how we might be able to sort of steer and shape what's going into the machine. Always be authentic, always be transparent, and stick to those EAT principles. If you are doing this through sort of inauthentic means, it will compromise everybody's reputations, your clients and yours, and we must stay true to that. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Johnny now, who is going to take us through the next section.
One of the biggest problems I always have is we do all these measurement reports and the board says, so am I going to make more money from this? And I sometimes think we get so excited about all the activity that we're doing, we're forgetting that the audience doesn't necessarily understand our geekiness, and we have to make it easier for them to understand. I always say you need to write for the reader. In this case, the reader is the board, and we need to talk in their language. So on the next slide, please, we can borrow again some of Amek's principles about how we do measurement. The first thing is, do not get confused with outputs as measurement. It is not that. That is not everything. Outputs is all the things that we do and it makes us very busy. Outtakes is what happens as a result. What's our share of visibility? And we don't want to stop there. We can go even better. We can look at the outcomes. How have we changed behavior? But when I show the outcomes to our clients, often they go, so what? Has it made a difference to my bottom line? It's really difficult. And often we can't go any further than outcomes, but we should try and look to always show the business impact of what we're doing. My guidance to everyone on this call is never do outputs, never just focus on outtakes. Wherever you can, always do outcomes, but if possible, go all the way to look at the business results. So now I'm going to talk to you about how I've practically done this. On the next slide, please. The first thing is, let's just be honest about it. I want to start there because the amount of times people have said, we did this and my revenue grew by X. I was like, come on, we know that wasn't all down to you, but we need to talk about what we can practically see, what we can practically say. One of the things I quite like to talk about is goes back to the old Ehrenberg-Bass model, which is a link between your share of market linking to your share of voice. And this is a common thinking. Never just talk about yourself relative to your peers. We got 1 billion, great. But if our competitors got 5 billion, not so great, as a way of talking about things. So not just talk about yourself, talk about your competitors, but then talk about how that changes over time. The things I quite like depends on the kind of audience you're talking to. In the commercial side, they want to know about revenue. They want to know about your share of market. I love comparing, as I said before, share of recommendations as a percentage to the share of market. Maybe you'll get a consistent proxy over time. If it's corporate, let's talk about your reputation, your trust, your license to operate. If it's within the public sector, look at that affinity, look at that trust delta, that gap between where you are and where you'd like to be. These are the things that make a difference. It's not for profit. Think about your donations. If it's an employee brand, look at more people coming to you. Now, one of the things we like to talk about is what you can actually measure yourself. If you've got your own agent analyzing what's going on your own website, you can measure how much what you're doing is training Gen AI, is being cited by Gen AI, is being indexed by Gen AI. But most importantly, we need to be talking about the impact of what we're doing. Now, to close this off, I'm going to hand back to Anna, who's going to bring this all together. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you. Okay, so first off, thank you for your time, everyone coming in today. I know there's a few questions and comments in the chat that we'll get to in a second. Stuart, if you could just move on. Thank you. No more movie clips from me. But we just wanted to end on some key steps that, what can people take away? What do you need to do now? So you spent half an hour listening to us. What do you need to do now? So really have a read of the paper, follow the QR codes, follow the links. But the 5 key things that we need to do and take forward. 1, establish a baseline. Knowledge is power. Get that information, and then you can start to interpret it. Number 2, the paper mentions your upstream reputation. That needs to be fixed. That needs to be looked at. What do we mean by that? LinkedIn, YouTube, the channels where your brand is visible. Look at that and understand how you can optimize and make sure that that reputation is visible, coherent, positive sentiment, etc. Number 3, pay attention to your plumbing. Really interesting point. And what we mean by that is your website, is your content, your owned content, is that optimized for Gen AI visibility? And how are you connecting with your web team and your SEO team, your CRM team even? How are you coming together and making sure that you're optimized? Number 4, don't count citations. Focus on those meaningful metrics. And 5, interpret the data. It is fascinating and you can go deep and you can really get all Moneyball about it if you want to, but take it back, tell it in a meaningful way, tell it in a story, and help people understand the impact of doing this well. So Johnny, you're going to take us through questions now.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your help. As a reminder, please ask questions in the chat. We're going to go through these. If you've got statements you want to say, also put that and we'll read them out. So first of all, from DevNet, it's just too strong a statement to say people aren't using Google. People empower PR people in-house to communicate about these changes and the need to change strategies without losing integrity with SEO colleagues. I don't disagree with you. There is a fight, and sometimes strong statements are there to create a discussion. The fact is, we are moving towards zero-click, but there is still a role for SEO. The skills they've got to impact things don't go away. But we just need to look at those transferable skills about how we can collaborate together. Almost 80% of all citations are influenced by earned media. There's a strong role for PR, but there's also a strong role for optimizing owned websites to make sure that can be done. That is absolutely the SEO team. This is a collaborative, cross-functional approach. I'm going to call on Alison, if you wouldn't mind reading the question and your answer, please, Alison.
Sure, of course. So really interesting question from an anonymous attendee. How would you recommend, it's moving as we do things, compiling which unbranded prompts to measure without risking going for prompts that might be favorable to your brand or business rather than the genuine searches from potential customers? Really interesting question. Thank you for asking it. I think to build on what I was saying before, this is about getting under the skin of the audiences that you're looking at. So I would start with that brief, really understanding who is it, where are they? And then it's really great, depending on the size and scale of your organization, you might speak to your planning team, who often are the closest to that end target audience. You might look at research reports that you have for what those audiences are looking at, what are their concerns, what are their interests, what are the competitors that they're evolving. And the other thing is just to look at the data, obviously, as it comes in and as you get it back. If you have data that is telling you an entirely different story to what you're seeing everywhere else, that's where you might want to look at whether the prompts are actually giving you an accurate reflection of everything in the full universe that you're looking at. Or actually, it might be that you're seeing a really interesting trend. But either way, it's always useful, again, to bring that context to the data. Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you for asking the questions. I'm going to hand over to Sanjeev to answer Hannah's question. Sanjeev, if you could read out Hannah's question, please, and leave it to you.
Yes, of course. And great question from Hannah as well. So if we are in an increasingly zero-click world, then surely measuring website actions is not very relevant, impactful. How else can we measure impact on action perceptions? Brand tracking surveys should also include questions on AI usage for brand research and info. So it's absolutely true. And the guide, we talk about this in detail there. A fall in clicks alongside rising AI visibility is not a failure. It's kind of what we expect. Since AI answers are increasingly satisfied queries without clicks, that's why, to Johnny's point at the end, the framework separates outcomes and impact. Websites are only one signal, and the real goal is we're connecting AI visibility to what brands are already tracking at the moment. So sales, leads, donations. We're not just looking at web sessions. What I would say is that's also precisely why we have branded search volume trend within that measurement metric, because it captures kind of the stuff outside of just needing a click. On branded surveys, that's absolutely true. And for your initial kind of prompt log, it's exactly where you will get the information to increase the complexity, and you can kind of weight the AI agents that are more important for certain brands. Everything in the seven metrics, initial kind of approach metrics, need to work together. In isolation, they won't give you the full picture, and that's what's really important. And you can start adding additional complexity to it wherever you need to. So if you do have more information from surveys that you conduct, of course, that will help make this measurement more robust, and definitely include that in kind of the initial prompts that you're searching, additional tools that you have for server log data, and et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks, Sanjeev, and thank you for asking the question. There's quite a few questions on tools from Samantha, Yasmin, Claire, and Tim. Stuart, would you mind having a go and just giving the tool answer, please?
Yeah, happy to. I think so. Last November, Public Relations published a white paper on this, and I think at the time we identified about 80 different tools that you could use for kind of geo measurement. And we were just having another look recently, and that number's kind of now well over 100, kind of 120. So I think there's a lot of tools out there in the marketplace, and I would never go out there and recommend a specific tool. What I would say is that I already kind of mentioned earlier the need not to just kind of use one, and to actually look at that kind of basket, because the numbers that you're getting for them aren't necessarily definitive, they're directional. And the tools available on the market roughly split into kind of three categories. There are the brand new tools that are specifically around kind of measuring geo. So there I'm thinking of companies like Profound or Peak AI. They're kind of new companies that have established especially to do this. The second category is kind of the SEO companies, tools that are beginning to pivot, whether they're kind of Ahrefs or SEMrush. Most of the traditional SEO companies, they see what's happening with search, they see the rise of geo, so they're beginning to kind of introduce new tools, either new tools or add to their existing tools. The third, and potentially but the most interesting for kind of public relations and communications professionals, are the traditional PR tool providers who are beginning to add geo to their offering. So there you're looking at people like kind of Inclusive and Meltwater and Viewleo are now all looking at kind of the geo space and what we can do to measure it. And you also have companies like RepTrak who are now starting to measure AI answers using the traditional kind of approach that they have to measuring reputation with other stakeholders. So kind of RepTrak's approach to it is to look at AI as a stakeholder. And in terms of choosing one, there's a huge range of price points out there. And there are also kind of open source tools where you can kind of host and run them yourself if you've got a bit of technical knowledge. And there, you're not going to be kind of paying kind of that monthly or kind of annual license fee. You are probably going to be kind of paying to use the kind of the APIs of different kind of AI engines that you're using to support it. But it's really about kind of understanding what it is you're actually trying to achieve. What information do you need? And some of the tools are more suited to doing kind of brand and e-commerce and sales type work. Others are more suited to doing kind of reputational type work. And I think the final point I'd make on this is look at how they do their prompts, because one approach is some of the tools out there will have a panel or a pool of user prompts that they will use. So that's the approach that Peak AI and Profound take. And you can also use your own with them, but others will require you to kind of define what the prompts are that you're going to be measuring. So it's really thinking about what your audience is, where that pool comes from, whether it represents the stakeholders and audience that you're interested in.
Thanks, Stuart. I can see a couple of questions going back to the business impact ones. One says, what are some ways you can measure business impact? You said demonstrate business impact if you can. What determines whether we can or we can't? And there's another question that says, for companies we work with that can't share business numbers candidly, what is the best way to show output without that measurement metric that sits outside of our work with PR and GEO? You know what? In the many decades I've been doing this, I think I can count on one hand the number of times a client has voluntarily said, here, take my business revenue numbers. I recognize it's totally near impossible to get those revenue figures. So I'm going to give you a few tips that I do. Number one, you give the share of recommendations number to your clients and ask them to say, compare this percentage value to your own share of market. You give them half the data and they can do the rest. Number two, if you can't do that, what can you do to show that proxy of change? Now, let's go back to some of the metrics that people like Sanjeev talked about. We talked about share of AI visibility. Let's just think about a few of the different things that count. We can look at the share of visibility. We can also look at the ranking of where you are for specific occasion areas, as opposed to the all topics. Focus on niche areas that are important. Are you leading in that topic? What's your share visibility in that topic? And then you can go to branded, unbranded prompts and thinking, are we being recommended more than our colleagues? If we show percentage change over time and ranking change over time, they are very closely linked to revenue. Now, for those of you working in the consumer space, one of the interesting things I'm finding is that a third of all prompts are actually generating shopping experiences within ChatGPT. That means you ask the question, and within that chat, it says, you can buy these products here. You click on it, and then it shows these are the merchants that sell it, and then you can go and buy through agentic commerce. This is actually really important because we are showing PR outcomes leading to the first answer that comes out, and then people being able to buy. How rare is it that we can actually show that full customer journey from question to purchase within the same chat environment? It's exciting for me in this measurement space to see that we are able to actually show that within the consumer area to be able to see a shopping-based action. So those are a few of the tips I would like to suggest there. There is a question on what's the best way to estimate search volumes for prompts and therefore understand which prompts to prioritize for measure. Has any of my teams, no one's come back on that. I'm going to give a quick answer. There's a few key ways that I have seen. First one, some people are using Google Trends as a proxy for that. That's quite a reliable way of doing it. It's a proxy, let's not forget that. And it also only works at the Google-owned Gen AI areas, but it's a good way. Also bear into mind the whole aspect of how query fan-outs, how the way Gen AI works is it takes clusters of words and expands upon them. It's not necessarily the whole prompt. Failing that, you may want to look at specific vendors that collect huge data volumes of content. People like SimilarWeb, people like Profound all do that. So those are some of the ways you may be able to do it. I'm going to move on to the next question. Does anyone on the team want to answer the one about crawler blocks and robot text? If not, I'm going to nominate Stuart to give a go on that one. So Stuart, can you please answer Tal Donohue's question, please?
Can you read the question? I'm looking for it at the moment.
Sure. What are your thoughts on crawler blockers and robots? Text. Is there a potential emerging issue of an over-indexing on tactics to influence AI visibility, which might not ultimately be as impactful on reputation? As many, e.g., many tier one media sources now blocked large language models.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you actually one of the things that you actually find is we're talking about kind of top tier media titles, and I think anybody that's actually done one of these kind of geo audits for, and once you start to do them for clients, very often it isn't actually the top tier titles that are the ones that are being the most cited. I remember a project that we did quite recently for a big global trade body, where their top 10 media titles were all ones that people here would be familiar with, but only three of them were appearing in the top 10 media titles that were cited by AI. So I think it means that we're going to be so for them, what that means is effectively their top 10 becomes the top 17, as there's some additional titles that they need to be thinking about as important for kind of earned media. I think there's also other kind of issues around kind of things like robots.txt, etc. In terms of, different AI models will respect things like that in different ways. There's been kind of stories about how, companies like Perplexity kind of are not necessarily respecting them. So I think there's a kind of range of issues to consider there.
Fantastic. I'm going to quickly run through a few questions on accuracy. There's a few tools that are out there. The question is there an automatic way to monitor accuracy within AI over time, or is this a matter of manually reviewing the results individually and noting inaccuracies? I'll tell you how I do it. I've uploaded my entire contents of a source of truth, and then we monitor the answers that come back against that source of truth and see if it's the same. And the AI agent then flags where the answer is different to our source of truth. I prefer that approach than monitoring keywords or other AI generated words for sentiment, because I'm looking for accuracy. Moving on to the next question. From Yasmin, do you expect the introduction of commercial partnerships to impact our ability to have any impact on our clients and brands GEO? Anna, do you want to have a go at answering that one?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question. And it's really interesting at the moment because, as everyone knows, ads are not indexed by generative. And we can see a lot of organizations trying to figure this out. And it's quite interesting. You sit in these rooms and people kind of are a bit perplexed by the idea we can't just buy our way in. Now, it's quite interesting. Some organizations have started to introduce these commercial partnerships that can influence AI, like Snapchat has just introduced something, which was quite interesting. I think what we have to always tie this back to is it expert? Is it authoritative? Is it influential? Is it trusted? And is it reflective of the consumer experience? Is it the right thing to do? Are we buying our way in, or are we generating the right level of impact? I realise it's not a straight answer, and it shouldn't be a straight answer. Commercial partnerships shouldn't be a silver bullet here. And if they do become that, then something's gone wrong. We need to make sure that we are working in the space as it's set up. We're feeding the machine. We're doing it in the right way. But commercial partnerships should be considered as a part of that, is what I'm saying, not in their current form. In their current form, which is in ad format, they're not going to deliver the value they should do.
Thank you very much. We're going to have a look at another question here about, in your opinion, how important are FAQ sections on a website for driving discovery through GEO? You know what? FAQs are an exceptionally good way of doing it, but I'm going to give an extra tip. Don't just do the FAQ about yourself. Mirror the questions to the ones that people are actually asking. If you make widgets, don't have your FAQ, how good is our widget? Is how good is the business problem? Look at the questions that people are asking. Gen AI has got a quarter of a second to scour the world and actually paste an answer into the answer. Now, if your FAQ mirrors the questions that people ask, semantic similarity, you are more likely to be cited. But don't forget, FAQs are one tactic. In addition to that, you need to have your Gen AI media list. In addition to that, you need to be doing optimized press releases on the wire. In addition to that, you've got to do YouTube with transcripts, LinkedIn Pulse, Reddit engagement. There's a million different optimization strategies you need to do. We need to be moving away from that approach of let's just do everything for one campaign to moving to a rolling thunder, always on, continuous thinking about how we can get our content out there. Remember, Gen AI has a recency bias. The content that is published this week is more likely to be picked up than that amazing white paper you published last year. Frequency updated large language content. Now, I am conscious we only have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to be calling on each of the panelists to give a 1 or 2 sentence maximum statement with the key thing everybody needs to go away thinking about. So I'm going to give everyone 10 seconds to think about it because they weren't prepared, and I'm going to call on you. So Stuart, 1 sentence, what does everyone need to go away thinking about?
Well, just do it would be the first thing I would say. I think the thing that I find shocking is when we go and speak to kind of on the kind of client side, really big organizations, is that they're still at the thinking about it stage. And if you go back to kind of Alison's point about there's no historic data, I think the most important part is that they actually start, they do that audit, they have a plan in place, they keep testing it and iterating it and improving it.
Thank you, Stuart. A bit more than 1 or 2 sentences, but I'm going to let it go. Alison, over to you.
Thanks. And I guess, yeah, I'd say it's those custom bits that aren't going to be there until you get started. There are some other tools that do give you a broader view, and your brands may be in there. So there might be some existing data that you can already draw on. But I would say if and when you get started, do think about what it is that you're trying to achieve first. Start from a measurement point of view, because it will serve you really well as you start to build that historical data archive.
Thank you. Sanjeev.
Report and log it and track it. Give explanations for the way you see things moving. That's the only way you're going to be able to iterate.
Perfect. Anna, what about yourself?
Remember Moneyball. Not everyone cares about the data as much as you do. And if you drown everyone in data, you will cease to be effective. Make sure that you are sharp, you're insightful, and you are connecting this to business impact.
And I suppose my single point would be when you're thinking about measuring visibility, don't measure everything in one go and have an aggregated figure. Think about the occasions. What is that specific area that, how visible are we in this area that maybe we want to lead in, or this area that we're trying to emerge into? Look at niche areas. So we are at the end of time. Can I please remind, Stuart, would you mind just putting the link for the download the white paper again on the screen? And can I remind everyone to download the paper if you've got questions? You've also seen the link for all of us on this PRCA working group. Please feel free to reach out to all of us. We'd be delighted to continue the discussion. Thank you all for your time. We really appreciate giving us an hour of your time. It's much appreciated. Thank you again.